Mike Gatto, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, it's great to be here.
First and foremost, I have to offer my deepest condolences to you and your family regarding the death of your father that occurred, was it November in 2013?
That's right. Thank you very much.
Yeah. But, we will talk about that later, but I want to start at the beginning. Why would you go into politics? Yeah. And as a follow-up, what did your wife think?
Sure. So, I went into politics at the height of the Great Recession. And as you can imagine, there was a lot that was wrong with our society and a lot that was wrong with the government. In my home state, I say we, but the state was literally pulling people off kidney dialysis machines because the state had run out of money. And there were so many things wrong with our government. There's still so many things wrong with our government that I was waking up every day and I found myself shaking my fist at the newspaper. And, at some point, I want to say it was a conversation with a friend or maybe a conversation with myself where it was like, well, okay, you think you can do better, buddy? you know, Give up your life, right? I mean, I had a good life, right? My job involved a 20-minute drive to downtown LA. I was making good money. I was very comfortable, newly married, child on the way. My I took a pay cut to go into politics, and my commute all of a sudden involved a jet, flying to the Capitol, and it took a lot longer and was a bigger pain in the butt. But at some point, right, it's like I like to think that good people have to say, if you're really, really tired of what's going on in the government, participate somehow yourself. If that's voting or organizing people to go out there and vote, or to get involved or to run for office yourself. And I chose the latter, and by some miracle, I won, which I was not the favorite by any stretch, but I was able to win, and I won 8 elections and served 4 terms.
Now, this is obviously in California. What positions did you hold?
So I was in the lower house of the state legislature. It's called something different in every state. Some states call it the House of Representatives. Some states call it the delegates. Some states call it the Assembly. California, New York, it's called the Assembly. It's just the lower house. I represented 500,000 people in a district that's centered in Hollywood.
Wow.
It was part of the city of Los Angeles, plus Glendale and Burbank. And when I was in the legislature, I chaired the Appropriations Committee, which is arguably the third most powerful position in the state. We determine how the legislation apportions money to be spent. So it was a very powerful position, and it was one that I was deeply honored to be entrusted with.
Well, I admire your heart because there's so many people, it's like, they have this opinion on whatever the case may be, but they never have a solution to the problem, or they don't even try to solve the problem. All it
Yeah.
is, like naysayers with, like I said, X, Y, or Z, pick whatever, you're doom scrolling on your phone, TV is just blasting you and social media is blasting you with negativity. And there just seems like there isn't any kind of solution, and I listen to the people who have a solution, even if I don't agree with said solution, at least they're trying.
For sure. It's like stand for something, show that you thought about the problem, show that you're going to do something besides bicker, because there's just too much bickering now.
I agree. What'd your wife think? Because you're putting yourself out there, man. Being an author of a book, you open yourself up to trolls. You have a podcast, same thing. I was going through some
For sure.
clips for a new show that I put out yesterday, and oh, the hate right away. And I'm just
I
like,
know, right?
hey, you know what? Suck it up, Buttercup. You signed up for this, so it's like.
Yeah, so
But
true.
being in politics, you put your whole family out there and yourself.
Yeah, my wife was initially very upset with me. First of all, did I mention the pay cut?
Yeah,
She was very upset at that. She was very upset at the disruption, the sort of the two households,
sure.
But then I think thirdly, she didn't really, I guess, appreciate the potential of politics to be like a force of good or like a life-changing force. But what's interesting is like she's also in that cohort, like I think everybody else in the country, where like in the last, for whatever reason, both sides in the last 10 years have really started to pay attention to everything. Now it's like whatever store you go to is a political statement, like whatever beer you buy is a political
Yeah.
statement, right? And she's now like that. And I'm looking at her like, you're now reading about politics 3 hours a day. And like, you didn't want me to go into it. And but I mean, I went into it to try to be a force of good, and and so it was pretty funny. So I think she started hating it and then kind of came around, but her coming around coincided with me leaving office. So look at that.
Oh my. Now, which governors did you work for?
So I was in the legislature for two, high profile governors, and then I actually ironically got to know a third high profile governor even greater because he was lieutenant governor. So when I started, it was the Terminator. Governor Schwarzenegger was
Oh,
the
how
governor.
cool is that? Okay.
Yeah, it was weird, right? Because it's like he's both a celebrity and he's the most powerful guy in the state, right? And so it was pretty darn cool. And then it was Jerry Brown, and he obviously had a national profile, sort of a reputation,
Sure.
and then of course Governor Newsom got elected lieutenant governor when I was in office, and we
Hmm.
worked together on a bunch of stuff, and so I got to know him super well too. And the irony is, out of the three, I probably know him the best.
Okay. Now, as far as Schwarzenegger goes, because I'm a huge fan, yeah,
Yeah.
I think of any like cool or funny stories about the Governor.
Um, I'm trying to think if I had any really cool stories myself. He, I mean, really, like, my most vivid memory of him is at a Capitol Christmas tree lighting. But I mean,
Okay.
he was somebody who, I think he got into politics for the same reason I did. Like, he got tired of like looking at the newspaper and being like, what are
Right.
they doing? You know,
Yeah.
and and yet it wasn't his life. I mean, he very much has a different life. He has his bodybuilding, he has his acting, and he has his other causes. And I think that makes him a well-rounded person, and so more power to him.
Yeah. And I think what I enjoyed about him being governor, I was I've been in Illinois and Wisconsin my whole life.
Yeah,
And I was thinking, it's like, he's looking at all this through the immigrant lens. He's an
that's true.
immigrant.
Yeah,
America is the land of opportunity, and both my parents are immigrants.
yeah,
And my dad, we'll talk about your dad too, about how hardworking he was. My dad never took time off. He never called in sick. And he's like, if
yeah.
you can't make it here, you can't make it anywhere. And,
So true.
he's like, but you have to put in the work. And I see
Work.
Arnold doing that. I mean, good, bad, or indifferent. I don't agree with everything that he says, but I appreciate his heart. And I think it's in the right place when it comes to public service. Anybody that's willing to do that, yeah, I think it's amazing myself.
For sure. Well said. Well said.
But what and who were your biggest influences growing up?
I mean, gosh, that's a good question. I mean, I'm tempted to say my dad, but that would not be accurate. My dad was not my biggest influence growing up. My dad was like yours. My dad worked so hard,
Yeah, I never
47
saw
years,
mine.
one
Yeah.
job. Yeah, like just that work ethic. I mean, my dad never missed a day of work in 47 years with one job, and he had three jobs.
God.
He worked so hard. I suppose that influenced me in terms of my work ethic without knowing it, right? Maybe that like seeped into me without me thinking, like I'm emulating my dad. The irony is when my dad got old and retired, he was like, "Hey, don't work as hard as I could smell the roses," and because I think he knew that, look, that generation, they were not as engaged in their kids' lives as this current generation is, right? I mean,
Mm.
let's just be real, right? And so I don't know. I mean, I like to read a lot as a kid, and I like to think I drew from a whole variety of influences. Like I would read about like Abe Lincoln and like some of the cool things he did and said, and I would feel like even though I didn't know him, like he would be an influence. And so that's always how I've operated. My mom was a big influence in my life. She taught me, a whole lot of morals, and she still teaches me a whole lot of like how to live a moral life. But yeah, that's it. Now, when I got a little older, I had a mentor who was a United States congressman, and just terrific guy, great head on his shoulders, great heart in his chest, and he was a huge mentor of mine
Who
for
was
sure.
that?
His name's Brad Sherman, and he's still in Congress. He's in his 70s, and he's a senior member of Congress, and just terrific, terrific, smart guy
Great. Yeah, it's if we're lucky enough to get those mentors, it can make or break you, I think.
for
A
sure.
couple of things will make or break you growing up. One is having decent parents who are engaged, even if they're stoic. Like my father was, he still is, and there ain't a whole lot of huggy, feel good stuff going on in the O'Donnell house.
Right.
But, he worked his ass off for us. And, he taught us morals. And my mom, she almost lived the life of a single mother because my dad worked so much. And my hat's
Yeah,
off to anybody that can do that.
for sure.
And,
Yeah, that's the same way that I was. That's the same way I grew up.
yeah. And you were also a good Catholic boy too, right? You grew up Catholic?
Good Catholic boy. I was an
Yeah.
altar boy. There were some weeks where between serving mass and going to mass, I went to mass 7 days a week. I mean, and yeah, both my parents very, very staunch Catholics.
Yeah, see, same thing. Both my parents are from Ireland, and 95% of the country is, Catholic. And if you're not Catholic, you live up north and you might be Protestant, or you're an alien from, Mars or something. There is no
Right.
other. Yeah.
I'm Italian heritage, and it's the same thing there. It's deep, deep tradition of Catholicism.
Oh, very much so. But you know what? I don't agree with everything the Catholic Church has to say, but
Right,
I
of course.
do like that root of good morals, and I don't think anything can
Yeah.
replace that, especially at a young age when you're impressionable.
Yeah, and what people miss with religion these days, I think, is that it's not just morals and what people perceive as dogma. It's also a sense of community. It's a
Yes.
sense of service. It's a place where people come together to think and reflect. Sometimes I'll encounter people and they'll be like, "Oh man, I was raised religious and I hate it," and they spend their whole life rebelling against it. And then it's like, "Well, what did you spend your weekend on?" And they'll be like, "Well, I attended a protest and I held hands and we chanted and and I'm like, okay. And it was like, and I fought in the battle of good versus evil. And then that night I went home and I meditated. And it's like, well, you realize like that's what like a church service is. It's just
Yeah,
about
pretty
every,
much. Yeah.
faith is like, you have some quiet time, you think about things and you get up and you have a community and you hold hands and and it just, I'm struck by, I think the secular has replaced the religious in so many parts of life.
Yeah, I just think about, mass, and I brought one of my college roommates to mass with me one time. He was Lutheran, and we like swapped. I went to a Lutheran service with him, he went to a Catholic service with me. And he's like, "Man, you Catholics are in good shape." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Man, you're kneeling, you're standing, you're sitting, you're genuflecting, yeah." He called it
Yeah.
Catholic aerobics, and I'm like, "Yeah, that's to keep
That's
us
so
awake,
funny.
Yeah.
So funny.
But I loved
So true.
in your book, I love the stories of your father working three jobs, that impact, the discipline, and the white glove inspections. Tell us about the white glove inspections. I love that.
So my dad was in the army, and even though he had a very artistic side, he wanted to instill discipline in me. So it's weird because to this day I am the most organized, left brain, you know, um, just whatever type A personality, and my house and my desk have got to be like perfect. But for the first I don't know, for a period of my life, I was a messy little boy, right? And so my dad was like, "All right, we're gonna turn this around," and he gave me his old army blankets and for my bed, and he told me that in the army you had to be able to bounce a quarter off your sheets.
Yep.
My mom was upset I wasn't making my bed and I had toys everywhere, and so he's like, "We're gonna instill this discipline in you," and so he said, "You got to start cleaning your room. I want your bed made. I want to come in and bounce a quarter off of it, and I'm gonna like make sure you've dusted it." And he did this like as like a big show, and it wasn't like mean or like whatever. But boy,
Yeah.
boy gosh, the one thing I was really focused on is pulling those sheets so tight that you could bounce a quarter off of them. And it's like something clicked once that discipline came in my brain. I have never been messy since. Like every woman I've ever dated is like, "Oh my God, you're so clean." Like, it's like, well, yeah, it's like, but I guess I owe that to my dad.
Yeah, again, we have a lot in common, Mike. Yeah, you, my room had to be spotless. There was no food, there was no beverage, allowed in your room. I couldn't close the door unless I was getting dressed or undressed. It had to be open. And, your bed is made. There can't be like a food wrapper, there can't be garbage. There couldn't be a sock or a t-shirt on the floor.
Yes,
None of
that's
that.
it.
Then I'd go like to other friends' houses. And I'm like, how do you live like this? Oh my God, this looks
Right.
cool. I want to be
Yeah,
sloppy.
but then you can't find anything, things smell and so
Yeah, that's a true story. That's a true story. So I want to dig in, the book that you wrote, Noir by Necessity. Let's start digging more towards there. Can you give us a snapshot of what your life was like a day or two before you were notified of your father's murder?
Great question. So, I never remember being as happy as I was for that time leading up to my dad's murder. I had just started to have a family, which meant a lot to me. The year before, our second daughter was born. And I remember feeling so happy and so fortunate when she was born. I was in public service, which I felt a true calling for. I had a family, a loving family, both, extended in terms of my parents, and then I was starting to procreate, and I had, two beautiful kids that we named our second daughter. Her middle name was Felicity, which comes from the Latin for fortunate. And I just felt lucky and fortunate so much that year. I felt like I had everything. I didn't have a lot of money, but I was so, so, so happy. And I also was sort of at the height of my power, right? I was, doing what I loved, passing judgment on other people's good ideas or bad ideas, and also putting forth ideas that I felt like could help solve or solve problems in the state or reform the state. But then, like I think, as you were alluding to, things changed quite a bit
Yeah.
with my dad's killing.
Yeah, November 12th, 2013, Joseph Gatto was murdered in an apparent home invasion robbery. And this case is still unsolved to this day. Do you remember your first thoughts when your sister called you with the news?
Yeah. Yeah. My first thoughts was, she initially thought that my dad had just died. I guess his room was pretty dark when she got in there. There was not like a messy crime scene. So she thought he had just passed away. And my initial thoughts were like, get out of here. No way. My
Right.
dad, people have to understand, my dad was older when he got killed, but he was really healthy. This was a guy who sprinted upstairs. He had all of his blood tests were great. He, was very active. He was very strong. He had good genes. And so, we thought he was going to live for another 30, 40 years.
Sure.
So when she called me and was like, oh, I went over to dad's house and I think he's dead, and I was like, nah, come on, get out of here. Like he's sleeping or something. I could not believe it. And then, of course, um, once it was confirmed, I want to say for a month after, I was still in disbelief. I actually slept with a copy of the LA Times on my nightstand because I had heard about this happening, and you see it in movies where like you wake up and you think it's all a dream. But I would wake up in the night and I would be like, oh, that was a really bad nightmare. And then I'd see the newspaper on my nightstand. And it was like, okay, like this is reality.
Well, there are stages of grief, and I'm a huge believer in that. It doesn't have to be in order, and they can reoccur at any time. This is what, I've been through and what I've seen through, 25 years being a cop. And, the first one is disbelief, and you're just rejecting the thought. It's like, no, that can't be.
Precisely.
And
Precisely.
I've seen that I don't know how many times. So that's very natural and normal. And your sister, was she notified by the police that like to do a welfare check, or how did that come to be?
No, she went over there, I think, for dinner. So,
Okay.
I was away in the capital, and so I don't know about all their weekday practices. I guess I was more familiar with the weekend practices, but I had two sisters, and I want to say each of them had dinner with my dad on a different day. For a while, it was the same day, and then there was
Okay.
some squabbling, and it was a different day. I don't know. But I think she went over there for dinner, or she was supposed to go over there for dinner, but like she called him or something, was like, hey, you want me to bring asparagus or something, and he wasn't picking up his phone.
Hmm.
So she went over there earlier or whatever and was like, hey, we're supposed to have dinner, and then, let herself in and found him dead.
Oh. Now, this occurs, your sister calls you, can you tell us about of more than one thing jumped out at me reading this book, but it really touched a nerve for me. Can you tell us about the news crews disregarding your and your family's safety and more or less just being disrespectful at such a difficult time? There was like news trucks out in
Yeah,
front of your house, right?
correct. So it was, I think the police on site immediately leaked to the media. Somebody must have, which
Oh,
is common, when there's a high profile case or, it's something of interest, there's often something like that. But I remember that, somehow someone in the state capitol dispatched a news crew to our Capitol house, and that's where we were. And my wife called the station at some point, and she was like, "Hey, could you move the news van? Like, it's our kids are trying to sleep and it's attracting unwanted attention. And like,
Yes.
and they were like, yeah, we'll think about it. But by the way, can you give us a statement? Like, and it was
Oh,
just like, oh my God, just a total pain in the butt. And it was quite the media circus for many, many days.
oh, that's, I have dealt with that. I it's like herding cats when you're at a big scene. And, it's like
Sure.
the smart thing to do if there's any cops that are in charge of big scenes, have a staging area for the press, no matter how big or small your scene is, and tell them this is where you stand. And
Yeah,
don't stand anywhere else. Don't go anywhere else. We'll talk to you.
sure.
It may not be right now. It may be an hour from now. It might be 5 hours from now. It all depends.
Yeah,
But boy, I've seen them do some low down, dirty stuff during my
for
career,
sure.
and I'm just like, oh, I don't know how you sleep at night. I understand you have a job to do, and I understand the value and why you're doing it, but boy, it just there's a line, and boy, they cross that line a lot. But oof. But anyways,
Sure.
yeah, that hit a nerve for me. But
Yeah.
and I'm sorry that happened to you, to your family. But how did you explain what happened to your father to your kids? How do you do that?
Well, so I should say that, our youngest at the time was only a year old. Our
Okay.
next, our oldest had known my father quite a bit. They had painted together, and she knew him quite well. She somehow intuited it. I think just some of it was, look, I mean, we had a 7-hour drive from Sacramento back down to LA. We're fielding calls the whole time. We're talking quietly. We're using code. We're trying to keep her away from it. We got back down to LA. There's stories on the radio, there's stories on television. She knows that something's wrong with me,
Yeah.
and it's still hard to talk about after all these years. But at some point, she just said, "Did somebody hurt Gramps?"
Mm.
And I had to say, "Yeah." I said, someone gave Gramps a big ouchie, and he's not coming back. And I don't remember why, but my wife was no, I do remember why. So I gave her a hug, and my wife took a picture. And there's a picture of us where, her eyes are red and my eyes are red, but we're hugging each other. And that was the moment where I told her. And it was tough because my dad was a very doting grandfather,
Sure.
and she was really bonded with him even in that short time. And to this day, I think my other children don't. They didn't know him, so they obviously don't feel a loss. They also don't know what things could have been, which is kind of weird. But
Right.
she, I think, feels a loss.
Mm. My gosh. Now,
Yeah,
what was your first contact with the police like? I'm always curious to see, because
yeah,
like I said, as a cop for 25 years, it
yeah,
becomes automatic for us, but this is a once in a lifetime tragic event for you. For us, it's just
yeah.
another day at the office.
Sure. The police on the scene were terrific. I mean, they were very professional. Once I had learned conclusively that it was murder, I got to work. I started working the phones. I mean, I called friends of mine who a really good buddy of mine was a former cop who got elected to the Los Angeles City Council. And so I called him and I just asked for, his advice. He put me in touch with the chief of police, talked with the chief. I talked with the detectives who were on site during that night. I mean, I didn't get much sleep. I mean, there's kept getting
Right.
updates and everything like that. But I finally got some sleep. We had missed the last flights out, so we drove down the next morning, bright and early. And then I got down there, and they had still not left the scene. These guys had worked 24 hours to secure the scene and everything. And I talked with them again, and they were pretty terrific.
Now, who was the police chief back then? Do you remember?
Gosh, I want to say it was Charlie Beck. Um,
Okay. All right.
yeah,
No,
great. I should know that off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure
yeah.
it was Charlie Beck. Anyway,
Okay. Now, did LAPD's robbery homicide take the lead in this investigation?
yes, you know a lot about LAPD. So they
Yes.
initially they had Northeast Division, which is my
Yes.
dad's geographic, but then they put RHO on it. And for your audience members, this is the elites,
Sure is.
specialists within LAPD. Yeah,
Yeah, New York has the same thing where you have a squad of detectives that can be handling anything from a bank robbery to a homicide to, a
sure,
sexual assault or whatever the case may be. But in certain cases, they have a citywide unit that will do this, and they're very
precisely.
specialized, and they're supposed to be the best of the best. And
Yeah.
Did you ever feel like you or your family were in danger?
I did. I did. So, the first 3 days, after the killing, and it was so hard to get good information. I think it's pretty typical that people start thinking like, gee, could this have had something to do with my profession or whatever, and especially because I had had a bunch of people who I had upset in politics. You can't run for office without breaking some
Oh,
eggs,
absolutely.
and and now granted, in 2013, I know it's hard for people to imagine, politics was still not as was not yet as acrimonious as it is now. So it was a little bit better. It's no, seriously, it was a little bit better,
Yeah.
but still, there had been a group of people who had followed me around and like dumped fake blood at press conferences and stuff like that, and they were like so extreme. There were three groups that were really, really extreme, and so I had concerns that they might have had something to do with it. I shared that with the detectives, and they just kind of laughed. They're like, look, you're a public figure, Mike. Your house in LA is in the white pages. Your house in the Capitol is in the white pages. Like, if they had wanted to get you, they would have gotten you. It's like, okay. I mean, hard to argue with that logic. But yeah, for the first couple of days, you don't know what to think.
Yeah, from the police side of the house, for a homicide that isn't like very apparent, most homicides that you respond to in a big city is somebody that's engaged in some type of criminality.
For
It's
sure.
like, okay, it's a dope deal gone bad. It's, fill in the blank. So
Sure.
this is, I hate to say it, but this is a real victim of a crime.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
red flags start tipping up and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. And again, from the police side of the house, one of the first, obviously you follow the evidence in the case, and that's what it should be. But many, many, many times the evidence kind of points towards relatives. It sounds sick
Of
and
course.
macabre or whatever,
Yeah.
but that's kind of the direction. It's somebody that they know and or a relative. It could be a relative.
Yeah.
You know,
No, I've been
and
told the same thing. I
and
I am. Oh, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I got contacted by a stat guy, and I don't remember the stats. You probably know him better than I do. But he said when an elderly person is killed in their own home, they know their assailant like 90, it was somewhere between 95 and 99% of the time.
I
Because
believe
if you
that.
think about it, right? Yeah, it's like if you think about it, like you said, if someone gets killed, there's never a justified murder. And you never say, oh,
Correct.
gee, that person, but you kind of understand if someone's driving down a dark alley to buy heroin at 2 in the morning, it's like, okay, well, you kind of understand. All right, that's a drug deal gone bad.
Right.
Or if somebody was getting into a fight with a biker gang at a bar, okay, maybe control your temper, right?
Yeah.
But an elderly person with no enemies killed in their home, my understanding is they know their assailant 95% of the time.
Yeah, one of the first questions that I'm sure they asked you was, and because I'd be asking the same question, is there anybody you know that has some kind of beef against your dad? Is there anybody that would have any reason whatsoever to want to harm him?
Yeah. And my answer was no. My dad was a beloved member of his community.
Yeah,
He had no enemies. He had hobbies and stuff like that. But it's not like he was fantastically wealthy, and it's not like he had any buddy out there who wished him harm. And that's another reason why it was so hard to swallow.
absolutely. He was a college professor, correct?
Yeah, he was a teacher, and he taught some college courses as well. And then he worked at Dodger Stadium selling peanuts too at night. So
Yeah.
three jobs. Yeah.
Wow. Now, did you think this was a burglary at first? Like a burglary
No,
gone bad?
no, you know, just that theory just never really sat well with me.
Okay. Now, what was the physical evidence that you knew of that about this
Yeah,
crime?
so I mean, people have to understand that my father was a collector. The pejorative term is pack rat. He
Okay.
had a three-story house that was full of stuff. So I think the police had a very hard time, seeing the crime scene, or understanding the crime scene. But when I toured the crime scene, I mean, what can I say? My dad had a three-story house. As far as we knew, there was nothing taken from floor one, nothing taken from floor two. He was killed in the upstairs master suite, which was floor three. That room had been partially ransacked, partially, not entirely. There
Yeah.
was a lot of valuables that the assailant or assailants did not take. I remember touring the crime scene, and my dad had a big gold ring that was not on his hand or whatever, and it was sitting right on his desk where I mean, he had sort of like a big setup there, but someone who was there would have seen it. They
Yes.
didn't take it. There were iPads that were not taken. There were paintings on the wall that were worth a lot of money if you knew. They were not taken. So I mean, it's kind of strange, but basically the crime scene was there was some partial ransacking in one room, and that was the room where my dad was.
Interesting. So, was there any CCTV or any type of video in the neighborhood?
No, and that's what's hard to believe in the year 2025. But in 2013, Ring doorbells, and I mean, you can check me on this, but I don't think they really existed yet.
Yeah,
Like
I don't think they
maybe
did.
like the
Yeah.
yeah, like the coolest people in Silicon Valley had some kind of doorbell camera, but then also my dad's neighborhood was a neighborhood full of like artists and like civil libertarians, and it's not the type of people who had security.
Mm,
So one of the things that was hardest for us to swallow was that in this whole area for blocks and blocks and blocks, and the police did try, nobody had a security camera.
wow.
Nobody.
Damn. Back then, I think you could go to like to Sam's Club or Walmart or whatever and get one for your garage. Like
Sure,
it would be a big
sure.
clunky security camera. In the
Yes,
neighborhoods that I worked at, people were doing it because they were sick of getting all their stuff stolen on a regular basis. So
precisely.
almost as a deterrent. And times have changed, dramatically since then.
For sure.
And you know, yeah, so you kind of had to just do old-fashioned door knocking back then.
Yeah,
That was just, just pounding the pavement. That's I guess that's
for
what
sure.
you had to do. Now, why and how did you re-interviewed witnesses
I
yourself?
did. Did.
You know, how did you, get their names? How did you go about it? And was it more frustrating or did it give you any answers?
Well, it was very frustrating. And I should back up and I should say that there was all these theories that came out about my dad's case. The first theory, which not even really worth going into, was that the Russian mob was involved, and it stemmed from my dad was about to give a talk about a class of paintings, and the society had advertised he's going to show up with some of these rare paintings, but I should stress these paintings were worth $5,000. They're not Van Goghs.
Right.
And whoever killed my dad walked right past him. So, but a neighbor had gotten that flyer and was like, talked to the media and was like, oh, it was probably connected to this. It wasn't
Yes.
connected to that. My next theory was that it was political. Police dismissed that. The theory that came to dominate the investigation for like 7 years, which has never sat well with me, came from a woman in the neighborhood. She was driving home that night. She had taken her son to karate, and she was coming home at about 6 o'clock, and she saw a guy breaking into cars on her street. My dad's neighborhood is shaped like a bowl, like a football bowl, and this was a
Mm.
couple levels above in the cheap seats, for lack of a better word. And she saw this guy breaking into cars, and she called her neighbor, a neighboring male, and they sort of confronted the guy.
Yeah.
And he allegedly said something vague, like, if you follow me, you're going to die, or something like that. And then he took off running. He ran down a walk street. There's these little tiny walk streets that cars can't go down that connect the different levels of the bowl, in my analogy. And he ran down the walk street. The police later told me that they thought he might be a neighborhood kid, because you don't know that these little tiny streets exist unless you're from the neighborhood. It's like a super local thing.
Yeah.
But in any event, they did chase him. They did confront him. They had to drive around this hairpin to get to where he had walked to on the walk only street. And I think at that point, he her son in the car, who was like 6 years old, told police later that he thought he brandished a gun. So what she did is this woman put out an email to like the neighborhood watch in the neighborhood and
Yeah.
was like, "Hey, I wonder if this is connected." And she put out all the facts. Now the media got a hold of that, and of course so did the police, and this rapidly became the dominant theory. Um, Now I should also tell you that I've never put a lot of credence into that theory, and I feel like a fool for pushing it with the public for all these years. When I asked the police, I said, "Tell me why you're so," because someone's breaking in a car in LA at any given point right now, like
Oh,
every
absolutely. Yes.
neighborhood. Like, why do you think this is so significant? And the detectives would always say Occam's razor, when When I see a horse running through the neighborhood, I don't go looking for no unicorn. And it was like, okay, but I said, tell me how you think this could have happened. Well, they said, well, here's our profile. The guy was breaking into cars, maybe looking for a quick hit. Maybe he's a dope fiend. Now, I initially say, well, why did he have a gun? Like, you're breaking into cars, you're turning a misdemeanor in California,
Into a
not going to spend
felony.
a night in jail,
Yeah.
into a felony, right? If you have a gun, also you just go hold somebody up. If you really need a fix, if you're a junkie, you go hold somebody up. There's tons of people just stick them up, take their purse. But anyway, they're like, okay, so he flees from these people. He was probably right-handed. Right-handed people, when they're being chased, tend to turn right. So that put him running towards your dad's street. And then he thought your dad's street was an alley. Your dad's street was really small. And so he darts down your dad's street. And at that exact moment in time, a tour helicopter was dispatched taking tourists to the Hollywood sign. My
Mm.
dad lived by the Hollywood sign, flight path. The guy thought, oh my God, it's an LAPD chopper. So he says, I've got to get inside. And at that exact moment in time, your dad had bought a printer from Costco, and he knew he came downstairs to try to get it out, and he figured, gosh, I can't get it out of the door. I got to open the hatchback. So he opens up his garage door, and he walks with the printer. He's getting in the house. At that exact moment in time, he presses the button, and the guy darts underneath the garage door. See, the police had to explain why there was no forced entry.
Right.
There's no forced entry in my dad's house. So he sits in my dad's garage for an hour. Now, the police have pieced this together by a timeline that the lady says.
Yeah.
My dad had worked to set up the printer. He had been on his computer, or somebody had been on his computer. So the last activity is 7:37 p.m. So the guy sits in my dad's garage. Now, mind you, he's in a house where he knows somebody's there, saw somebody struggling with a printer. He saw a garage door going down. He sees three freaking cars in the driveway. He doesn't know if the entire, Ukrainian wrestling team lives there, or the Los
Right.
Angeles Gun Club for that matter.
Right.
And he's sitting in a garage with a ton of valuables where he could just grab some valuable tools or whatever and press the button and walk out and be on his way. But no, he decides to go into an inhabited dwelling where he knows somebody's home. And rather than going to floor one and taking the valuables there and walking out, floor two, taking the valuables there and walk out, he goes to floor three where my father is, shoots him, watches him die, doesn't fire a second shot, doesn't panic because a gun went off, and then ransacks, or kind of ransacks, the house. You're probably like me. Like, I haven't even told you all the weird, but it's like, there's just no way, right? It just,
Right.
there's so much in that. And then, by the way, tries to get into a safe with a pair of garden trimmers,
Yeah.
right? Which
I read about
makes
that in the
sense if
book.
you're on
Yeah, that
drugs,
makes
right?
yeah, it shouldn't be discounted, but I would find it highly improbable.
Yeah.
That's
And
the
then, by
way
the
I
way,
would look
doesn't
at it.
talk, doesn't get caught, doesn't reoffend for 12 years. I
Yeah,
mean,
see, yeah, absolutely. Now, LAPD, did they ever call in the feds? Not to call in the feds to like take over, but for
yeah.
help from like an FBI profiler or
Okay.
that type of thing.
So I'm not aware of them calling in the feds for a profile, but they have called in the feds now for help with the DNA.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how much DNA did they get?
Teeny, 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 tiny bits. So this will mean something to you, but I don't know your audience. You ever read those articles where they're like, they uncovered a mammoth from, 5 million years ago, and they tested everything for DNA, but there was none. But they finally drilled into a tooth, and
Right,
they
yeah.
have this profile, but it's really fragmented. It's
Sure.
fragmented. It's not a whole profile. That's how little DNA they have. It is so teeny tiny. It is so fragmented, and it hasn't been much use. And they can't be 100% certain that it was my dad's killer. It's not like it was underneath his fingernails or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah.
This was taken from two tools that were on the crime scene.
Yeah, see that doesn't mean anything because even in your book, it's like okay, he could have gotten in a garage sale. It could have been touched by how many different people. That doesn't mean that they're all killers. It just means that they touched it. And
Sure,
so
sure.
it's the totality of the circumstances. So this is years are going by. This is getting frustrating. Obviously, you hired a private detective. Could you tell
I
us, was
did.
it worth your time and money and the pushback from the
Yeah.
LAPD?
Yeah, it was definitely worth my time and money. The private detective, the most interesting thing that he did was just talk with the neighbors. I think the police, busy department, DNA evidence, there's a temptation to just wait and see if the case solved itself. The private detective talked with a neighbor who said, I heard a gunshot at a way different time than what the police are
Mm,
saying. was like, well, how can you be sure it was a gunshot? And by the way, I ended up calling her myself.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, how can you be sure it was a gunshot? Well, how can you be sure of the time, first of all? She said, well, simple. I took my son to a class that was a 20-minute drive in the San Fernando Valley, and we had to leave precisely at this time every night so that he wasn't late. And so this happened before then. And so, I know the time. Okay. All right. That's credible. How could you be sure it was a gunshot? How could you be sure, it wasn't a backfire? She said, well, let's put it this way. I was dressed really nicely and I hit the deck. I was rolling around on my floor.
Okay.
All
Well,
right,
that's
again, a pretty credible thing. Like when I'm
yep.
dressed in nice clothes, I'm not rolling around the floor unless I think it's something serious. So,
Right.
so I tended to believe her, and that would have thrown a loop in the timeline, and it would have probably obviated the car burglar guy,
Yeah.
or meaning that or possible that he was going the opposite direction and trying to break into a car when they
True.
found him to try to get away, right? And so it's things like that that drove me nuts. I talked with the witnesses who saw the car burglar too. They said he was dressed super nicely, very expensive clothes, and so it was tough. It was tough.
Yeah. So, have you entertained or thought about hiring somebody in the non-traditional avenues, like a psychic or something like that, to try and help?
I have. I mean, I've thought about it. I never discount anything. I do believe there are some people out there who have the ability, to sort of intuit things that other people can't. I don't remember if I talked about it in the book because it happened right about the time I was writing it, and I don't remember if it happened right before or after. But a very good friend of mine did hire a psychic for me, and the psychic just, I felt, manipulated me in a
Sure.
really mean way. There had been a story that had come out on like national news about my dad that had zoomed in on his grave. And my dad, we put a hummingbird on his grave. He liked feeding hummingbirds. It's a long story, but
Yeah.
this psychic, I made my friend promise me that she would not tell the psychic anything about my dad's case, but somehow they found out my name, or they Googled me and they
Mm.
Googled this and whatever. And, first thing she said to me, she goes, I'm feeling the presence of hummingbirds. And I was like, come on, like, get out of here. Right.
Yeah.
And it was just so manipulative. And anyway, finally we got around to my dad's case and she said, I predict it's going to be solved by February 2024. It was wrong. It wasn't solved, and so, I mean, if there was the right person, like somebody who was like a part profiler, part psychic, I'd love to talk to them. But so far, the people I've talked to, I think have been charlatans.
Yeah. It's so cruel that there are those out there that'll play on people's emotions when they're, in the deepest depths of, their feelings, and they see that as an opportunity to make some
Yeah,
fast cash, and
for sure,
that's horrible. I just get
for
and
sure,
you are a public figure, etc. It's going to bring out the crazies. They're going to have their own ideas.
for sure.
I can only imagine. I know in your book you had a few examples, and I was just like,
Oh yeah,
man.
yeah,
So I also, in your book, you had some political pressure to become the face of gun control. Can you kind of tell us a
yeah.
little bit about that?
Yeah, so I got a call, uh, I forget how long after my dad's killing, where someone wanted me to come speak with the president about gun control. And, I thought, I had a couple thoughts. First of all, I never wanted to politicize my dad's killing, and I never wanted to be perceived to be aggrandizing my political career based on my dad's killing. So for the longest time, I didn't do podcasts till this year. I mean,
Okay.
12 years into it. I did
Yeah,
media because I thought it would help us catch the killer, and
sure.
like getting the sketch out there and all that stuff. But anyway, so and then but the main reason I turned it down is I think there's a lot of demagoguery on the gun issue. I think it comes from both sides, but I think, particularly it comes from a lot of the gun control proponents, and a lot of the gun control proponents focus on like assault weapons, so-called assault weapons, and the reality is most crime is done by handguns.
Yes.
Handguns are very easy to conceal, very hard to ban. And I just felt like it was not going to be the right legacy for my dad. So I turned it down. I turned down speaking with the president about my dad's, with the president on a stage, and becoming this sort of gun control spokesperson. there's a lot of people out there who have suffered tragedies who have made millions of dollars off their tragedy, but I don't think I could ever do that.
Yeah. Well, good on you. I think you took the high road for the right reasons.
Yeah,
So, I'm thinking about the science that we have right now compared to 2013, and it's much, much better. And, DNA, like we talked about that, we have more tools, we have much more advances. And I think AI is actually going to play a strong role. They'll put in all the facts and the evidence of a case, and it's almost like having another partner. I mean, we shouldn't like,
sure, sure,
blindly follow it. It's like, well, of course that's 100% correct, but it might take you down some different avenues that you didn't think of yourself.
for
A-
sure.
And I'm thinking to myself, it's like, but your father's murder is still unsolved, even though the science is so much better than it was back in 2013. And this isn't something that's an anomaly. Clearance rates for homicides across the country are like 50%.
Yeah, yeah,
And there's never been a better time for science. For, in theory, we should be clearing a lot more of these cases.
I agree. I agree. When people ask me what's if you could wave a magic wand, what would you do from a policy perspective? I would say I would ask the federal government to make grants available, make a lot of funding available for every department around the country. Because by the way, there's a lot of like rural departments that don't really know how good the science is. They don't understand it, and they don't understand that like resources are available. But I'd like to think if the federal government, pass like a national, because I mean, look, when you're solving crimes with DNA, it tends to be murder, rape, and maybe serious assaults, right? These are the worst of the worst crimes. And if the federal government could make billions available to local law enforcement to actually go back and retest a lot of these cold cases, I agree with you. The science has come so far.
It has.
Even fingerprint science has come so far that you could get
Yep.
prints and DNA from things you couldn't get before. And I mean, gosh, if even we solved a quarter of these cases, it's a family just like mine who would say, my gosh, we finally have answers. And you're taking another dirtbag off the street.
Absolutely. So there wouldn't be another victim. That
Yeah,
that's the
right.
main. I mean, yes, there's lots of stuff wrong with justice system. There's prisons aren't really there for rehabilitation. They turn into gladiator camps in my, and but we don't have a lot of solutions to these problems. But
Yeah,
for now, it's like get these people off the street for God's sakes, that
for sure.
are the worst of the worst, that are the most violent, that, are just victimizing so many people. But, you know, I'm just looking in maybe some more reasons. And I think, the obvious is police departments are understaffed and they're juggling multiple cases. They,
Yeah,
and for you, this is the most important case in the world. For them, it's
yeah,
one on top of the stack, unfortunately,
for sure.
of cases
For
that they
sure. So
have.
true.
And also, I mean, this might be kind of controversial, but they lower the standards to meet quotas in our police departments, and that trickles down to detectives that are going to be investigating a loved one's murder. So think about that.
That's a
And
good point.
I think also that we've gotten away from good old-fashioned police work. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of
Yes,
bright and shiny, cool stuff out there, but nothing beats banging on a door at 2 o'clock in the morning and talking to that neighbor who was like,
I
"Hey, come
totally
on
agree.
in. I don't want the neighbors seeing me talking to the police." But I tell you what, Ring doorbells are great tools, and I've got one in my house, but nothing beats a nosy neighbor, to tell you the truth. A little old
I totally
lady
agree. And like,
that knows
I,
everybody's business.
yeah,
Gladys
even
Kravitz.
talking with my dad's friends. I mean, he had like really close friends that they never interviewed, and I just thought that was weird. It's like, I mean, but I
Yeah,
know they finite resources, finite time. And by the way, that was one of the drawbacks to having robbery homicide on the case is like, there'd be like a celebrity who, had their car or their home broken into, and they'd be like, "Hey, I can't talk. I gotta like, we just got called off on this case," and then it would be like death threats against a local official. It was like, "Oh, I can't talk.
sure.
I got," and so yeah, it's an imperfect system.
Yeah, it is. And we're not attracting the best of the best anymore. They're having troubles recruiting people to become police officers. So we have to think of ways to recruit the best of the best. We have to think of ways to make law enforcement attractive again to young people that want to get into this. It's a vocation. It's not just a job. It literally is a vocation. Just like what you were doing, that's a vocation. That's public
for
service,
sure.
I think, in whatever form, is a vocation. And you have to, we as people have to figure out, it's like, okay, how do we get these people back who want to do this kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point.
So, one thing you hear a lot is closure. And I think closure is a fairy tale. Most families of murder victims never achieve this. Do you think you would have closure if you got a phone call today from the police department saying, yeah, we got him?
I don't know. I've wrestled with that. I've wrestled also, being Catholic, I've wrestled with forgiveness. When Charlie
Right.
Kirk's wife got up in front of that whole audience, and I mean, you could see and feel the pain in her heart,
Oh, yeah.
and she said, "I forgive." I don't think. Look, it all depends, right? Like, people have asked me, "Have you considered that your dad's killer could have been an old guy that felt like he, cheated him at a card game and had dementia and went over there and they wrestled with a gun and and that explains why there's no forced entry." And yeah, I mean, I've considered that, and obviously that would be way different than somebody killed my father premeditated for financial reasons, right?
Right.
Way different. Could I forgive an old guy who had dementia? Probably, right? I mean, I still would feel awful, but
It's situational.
this idea of closure,
Yeah.
I know lives are irreparably changed when something like this happens. I mean, you're closing what? I mean, there's justice if the person goes to prison. There's knowing the mysteries, right? There's knowing the reporter's questions, the why, the how. Like, that is another form of closure. There's putting the case to bed and not having it bother you all the time. That's another form of closure. But like you said, I think it's elusive. From what I've my conversations with other victims' families, it's elusive. You can do your best to move on, to not let the grief overcome you, and to help other people in the same position.
Right. I just from reading the book and just my experience, and this is just me in 25 years of being around hundreds and hundreds of homicides and, other crimes. I think it's somebody that he knew or he
Yeah.
trusted.
Yep.
And for whatever the reason, usually the motive, follow the greed, follow, the money,
For
follow
sure.
the jealousy, follow, there's a myriad of whatever, or it was an accident. Maybe it was a low level crime and, they thought, well, the gun went off. I've investigated those
Yep.
too.
Yep.
So, you know, that's
There's
where,
even a part of me, somebody asked me, and I'd love your opinion on this, is there's a lot in my dad's case that seems really brilliant. Nobody's been caught, you know, um, certain other things, right? And then there's a lot that seems really dumb, like person high on drugs. Somebody said, "Well, have you thought that there were two people? That there was a brilliant person who went over there to intimidate him, and maybe he was in a spat with him, and they brought muscle with them." And something happened. The gun accidentally went off, and then the smart person was like, "Hey, I'm out of here, you idiot! Like, why'd the gun go off?" And that person was the one who stuck around and tried to do all the stupid stuff. And so I thought, like, yeah, that would make sense. I mean, there's a lot of different things that would make more sense than where things are now, or the theory that went out to the public. But yeah,
yeah,
when I think too, I think it was somebody my dad knew, one hundred
yeah,
percent.
I believe so too. Most crimes are not some criminal mastermind that's behind it. It's like I said previously, follow the money, follow the greed, follow the sex, follow the jealousy, et cetera, et cetera. And you'll get your answer. And the no forced entry and the theory of them just like rolling into the garage as the garage door is closing and I'm not buying any of that to tell you the truth.
Yeah,
But, I wasn't there and I don't have all the evidence, but I still think it is somebody that he knew and or trusted, or what could have happened too is whoever this person is could have died themselves. They could have overdosed the next day.
yeah, that is something that the police have talked with me about. They've said, you have to be mentally prepared for the idea that if this was some crackhead, he could have been, lying on a street as a John Doe. And they don't
Yep.
test DNA for John Does, and
Nope.
or at least I don't think they do, unless I forget. But in any event, or they don't upload it into the crime database. Is that so? They do test it, but they don't upload it. So they're like, yeah, you could never know who killed
Yeah.
your dad. I was like,
And
yeah,
one of the last homicides that I investigated was an illegal alien that killed his boss. He was actually, it was a very Hispanic neighborhood, and this guy came to this country and he had a produce company. He had a warehouse and he did really well for himself. and he would take in people that, were undocumented or whatever
Seriously.
to give them a job. And they got into an argument, and the guy that he gave the job to stabbed him to death.
Jeez.
And what made it really difficult was we had nothing on file for this guy. He was a ghost. He just came here
Jeez.
like a month ago.
Sure.
So that's something,
But
and sometimes they move
that
back.
but that is something though with the DNA that I have. It's controversial, and the police have told me it's controversial, but I have gently pushed them in that direction. Okay. My understanding is that so there's all sorts of different things you can do with DNA. The first one is CODIS, right?
Right.
There's little markers that are not indicative of anything, but that goes up to the FBI database, and that's how you solve it. The next one is there's the Familia DNA database where
Correct.
you're looking for male relatives of your suspect. Okay, also very helpful, very straightforward. The third thing is, people talk about genealogical DNA, very controversial. It's less powerful than people think. I totally understand that. But there's sort of a fourth and a fifth thing. The fourth thing is that my understanding is that if the DNA is male, you, you have these, like, for lack of a better word, sire lines, like you have in
Mm.
horse racing, where there's only a few of them in the world. Well, there's like 100 in the world where it's a certain line that is unchanged all the way back to the beginning of time, and it's like a last name. Now, of course, if there's a out of paternity event, as they call it, if the person doesn't know their dad, he won't have that last name. But there are services online where you can upload these markers, and it'll say this line is indicative of somebody with the last name O'Donnell, right? Or this
Really?
line
Okay.
is indicative of somebody with the last name so and so, right?
Yeah.
And why we don't do that, I don't understand. Because if you get lucky and it's this very particular one, there's like projects online where you'll have an entire family with last name McAllister, right? And they'll say, we're trying to figure out if the people with the last name O'Allister and the people with the last name Allister and the people McAllister and MacAllister, if they're all related, right? And in many cases they are, right? And they all
Right.
descend from one guy right? And so that is something that I don't think that they're using. The second thing is, and this is the controversial part, when you pull DNA from somebody, you can get a pretty good idea of what ethnicity they are, a pretty darn good idea of what
Yes.
ethnicity they are.
Yes, you can.
And, if my dad's killer was like Uzbek or Russian or, like Los Angeles, people in Los Angeles tend to be Caucasian, like white, Hispanic, or black. And there's a large Asian population too. But if this was some random ethnicity that we don't have a lot of in LA, then I'm thinking more hired hitman who has left the
Yeah.
country, and that's why there it goes, right? And so just having those data points, I'm not interested in blaming one ethnicity for my dad's killing, but I would like to know if it's so unique. And I think that's where law enforcement would do better, right? Is just by those last two pieces of the DNA puzzle. And I don't know if that comes across as totally naive, but I'd love to see that happen.
I don't think it's naive, but everything that the police do, whenever you had any kind of investigation, my mind and every other cop or detective's mind goes to imagine yourself sitting in trial right now and defending
Sure,
your
sure.
actions when a defense attorney is going to try to rip you apart.
Yeah.
So that's where my brain goes to immediately. And if this isn't proven, I mean, what you're saying makes a ton of sense to me. Especially like you said, if it's like I, somebody from Micronesia, it's like, okay,
Yeah.
it's like
Right.
that's unusual for this part of the world.
Right. And I'll tell you, like I understand the trial thing. Like you would never want to go to trial and say, like, well, the suspect was from Micronesia, and so is Jim, who's sitting there. Like, no, I mean that's but
Right.
like focusing our outreach, right? Like when I'm out there, giving my hey, if you know something, come forward speech. Maybe we should be doing that within the Micronesian community, right? That's one thing.
Right.
The second thing is, if you get lucky and you find one of these surname projects, and it's like, wow, most people who have these characteristics, their last name is Sinclair. And there's variations, St. Clair, St. Cloud, this, that, the other thing. Then you're like, well, gee, one of my dad's neighbors had that last name. Well, bing, right? Then all of a
Right.
sudden we've got a break.
It's
And
it
that to
won't
me,
it probably wouldn't solve the entire thing, but it might steer you into a
right,
direction
right,
where it would be beneficial and ultimately it could, help solve the
correct,
entire case. But,
correct, correct.
I want to be respectful of your time. I want to just go through a couple more
Yeah,
things. Having
sure.
gone through this and still going through this, what advice would you give to someone who is living this type of nightmare?
Gosh, great question. So, what really helped me personally was taking lots of notes because your brain is trying to process things. And there's something about the act of writing it down and organizing it that I think helps the brain process things. It also helps you remember, frankly, what you heard from somebody at some point. I mean, I interviewed all the witnesses, I interviewed all the neighbors, private detectives, people who knew my dad, all these different things, right? The detectives themselves, take good notes. Make sure that you are writing this stuff down because there's something cathartic about just doing that. Secondly, never be afraid to assert yourself. I mean, make sure that do it gently and don't be a jerk. Nobody likes a jerk. Lord knows there were probably some times where I was perceived as a jerk by the detectives, but you know, this is your relative. You would not be a good person for your relative, a good son in my case, unless you actually fight for justice. And so, don't ever be ashamed of that. Um, Feel free to do what you can to keep your case alive because those are the cases that get solved.
No, that makes total sense to me. Now, your book, Noir by Necessity, How My Father's Unsolved Murder Took Me to Dark Places. What were some of the unanticipated side effects of writing this book? Or were there?
There were very few. First of all, I wrote it not just for trying to help break my dad's case, but really for to give a sense to all the people out there who never go through this. You understand this life. Some of your listeners understand it. And obviously, if God forbid you have a relative who's been murdered, you understand it. But that's a small percentage of society. Most people, thankfully, never cross this world. And I encountered so many victims in the last 12 years, um, or family members of murder victims. And most of them, they live their lives in obscurity. I'm so fortunate that I have my dad's case has been on Dateline. It's still a feature in the news, broadcast news. I'm fortunate to be on a podcast like this. I'm fortunate to have a Twitter following. Most families of murder victims don't have that. And yet they go through their daily lives and people don't really understand what they're going through. So I just wanted to give the public a little window of like what it's like and what it goes through, what a family member goes through.
Well, I can't recommend this book enough. I'm not just saying that.
Thank you.
It's very well written. I got the audio version because I love audiobooks, and it passed the parking lot test. My parking lot test is I'm listening to, the book on the way to the gym, on the way to the grocery store, wherever, and I'm sitting in the parking lot and I don't want to leave my car because I want
That's
to know
amazing.
oh man, I have to finish this chapter at least. It's like
That's
I
really
want to
cool.
know what's going on, but I think it's very helpful and it's easily digestible. And like I said, it's very, very well written. I can't recommend it enough.
Thank you. Thank
So
you.
just to close this down a little bit, we were talking a little bit off air, what's happened to politics? I mean, you're a politician.
Sure.
The last few elections, it just feels like it's a cast of clownery on both sides. And,
Totally
you know,
agree.
there's just never what we've come away from is that's my guy, that's my gal. I really believe in what they believe in, and I think they've got a good heart. And when things get tough, they're going to do the right thing. Maybe not the most popular thing, but the right thing for us as a people. And now it's turned into I'm just not going to vote, or I'll vote for the lesser of two evils. How do we get back to something better than this?
Great question. So I think a lot of it centers around trust. The American public started to distrust politics after the JFK assassination, then the RFK assassination, MLK assassination, Watergate, Vietnam, Iran Contra, and it's just been this progression. When that happens, the public feels like you can't trust anything. And they're probably right. But what that ends up, my understanding is people who have studied this, then what it does is it turns that anybody who just sort of speaks their mind, it doesn't matter what they're saying, they get trust. So like Bernie Sanders, just because he speaks his mind, it's like people are like, oh, I'm going to trust him, and it's like, okay, I get that, but I would rather have like the measured thinker, the JFK type, the Eisenhower type, who gives a speech and thinks it through and doesn't just kind of like say whatever's on his mind. I mean, Trump and Sanders, that's what they do. But the weird thing is the public is so distrustful that they view that as trustworthy now. So I think there's a trust problem. And then, yeah, I mean, we live in a world where people are like my side, right or wrong, where it really should be more based on principles. And
Yes.
there's very little consistency of principles out there. And then you magnify all the problems of social media and so on and so forth. Yeah, we're in a big mess. What's it going to take? I don't know. I mean, I'm very worried about the direction our country's headed, and it breaks my heart to see that people don't seem to agree on anything. One side says the sky is blue, everyone's saying no, it's a shade of green, and
Yeah.
and so I don't know. If you're a good person out there, run for office. That's what I say. Maybe you should consider at some point because you got. No, I'm serious. You have a perspective, and you've lived in a world where you certainly know, like, I mean, you know what victims' families go through. You had all this experience enforcing the laws. Maybe you should go make some.
Wow, that's
You do better than who's there now.
yeah, yeah. You know what? I never thought of it, but yeah, who knows? Stranger things have happened, I guess. But have you considered going back into politics and maybe running for higher office?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about it a lot. For the longest time, I thought, gee, it'd be really nice if my dad's case was solved before I do that, just because for a while it was taking a lot of time and stuff.
Sure.
But people have told me, Mike, your dad's case might never be solved, blah blah blah. So I want to get back into politics, but ideally for me, I was always the type of guy who liked working with everybody. And I don't know right now that that type of person is appreciated in politics. I truly don't know that. And I would love to return to a place where the public is hungry for that again. But then, when I say this to some people, they say, well, no, precisely, you need to run because you need to convince the public that they want a guy like you, somebody who will work with everybody. So we'll see. I don't know. I like to think the answer is yes, and that it's a matter of when, not if. But at the same time, right now I'm just focused on being the best dad I can be.
Well, Mike, I would vote for you. I know you're a Democrat. You know, it's California, so there's no other way you're going to win
Yeah,
anything.
right.
But and I lean more towards the right, but I wouldn't think twice about voting for you because just reading your book and talking to you, you got a good heart, and that's who you want in public office.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you
hey,
so
if it
much.
happens, I'll be one of your guys, okay? I'm there
Thank
for
you.
you. So,
I really appreciate it.
let's finish this up. You know, if you had a billboard that millions could see, what quote or words would you put on it?
Oh, I got a great one.
Good.
And there was a true billboard that where this was. The billboard. There's actually a series of billboards outside Seattle at some point that I think some eccentric guy paid for.
Okay.
And the first one, it was on the busiest highway. And the first one said, "You are not stuck in traffic." Dot dot dot. And people saw it and they got pissed. I'm sitting in traffic and it's bumper to bumper. Blah blah blah. And then you go a few more miles down the road and it says, "You are traffic." And the point of that is that it's very easy to think the other guy should do it, right? Why are all these cars on the road? Well, you're one of the cars. And if you think about that with everything in life, what is my role in this? What have I done? What is like everything we do in life, we are a piece of it. We are a piece of the pie. And I think that billboard was so deep, right? And, if traffic bothers you, get out of your car. If, something else bothers you, change your own life first. It starts with you, is
Yeah.
basically the message that I put on it.
I love that. I've never heard that before. That's fantastic. I love it. So the name of the book is Noir by Necessity: How My Father's Unsolved Murder Took Me to Dark Places. You know, I can't thank you enough for being on the show today. And I know this wasn't easy for you. You know, yeah, I just appreciate everything that you said to us. I appreciate you being here. And yeah, I couldn't be happier. And I highly recommend your book. And I wish you nothing but the best, Mike. You know, and
Thank you.
where can people go to find out more about you and your book?
Oh, so my book's on Amazon, like everything else. For what it's worth, I donate all the proceeds. You can't get rich as a first-time author anyway,
Nope.
but I donate 100% of the proceeds. So you can go to Amazon and find it. And then my website is mikegatto.com. As long as you spell my last name correctly, Gatto, you'll find me. But listen, I really appreciate you and I appreciate your audience and anybody who cares about these cold cases. Thank you so much for what you're doing, and thank you to everybody who's listening.